That's great. Well, I'd like to move on a little bit and maybe
Yeah.
continue to ask you something else here. So I've heard you discuss before, and this is very interesting for me in terms of the thinking about the data itself. And so I've heard you discuss about the importance of the data we gather in products kind of accurately reflecting the reality of what we're dealing with. So, customer purchasing, onboarding, whatever. And that not only can this sometimes be difficult to do to get an accurate picture with data, but that too, even if you gather accurate data, that data can be misinterpreted or misunderstood through flawed thinking or logical fallacies. And I think you give some talks internally in the company with some exercises that were interesting because people thought they knew what they were interpreting, but they did not do it correctly. So are there any common examples of this that product managers can fall into when making decisions based on their interpreting the data? And how, in general, can we all get more accurate pictures by looking at data in order to avoid these pitfalls?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll maybe start off by saying that I'm definitely one of the people who has fallen into these pitfalls. That's why I'm going to share them with you. I'm not sharing them from a point of, oh, I know better than everybody else. And that happened to
You,
me.
you
I
you
fell
haven't
down
you
and
haven't come down from the mountain to tell all the other to tell the other product managers what they should and shouldn't do.
no,
That's great.
yeah, no, exactly. It's been pain, and I've made a lot of mistakes. But so one place where we could start is this customer development cycle we were just talking about a moment ago. So
Mhm.
when we're talking about interviewing people and getting to know them in order to understand what's valuable for them, it's not uncommon for product teams to ask for feedback internally within their own team. So they start asking each other, oh, I did this. What do you think about it? No, oh, I like this, or I don't like this, and let's work on this. And then when everybody's happy, they push it out into production and the results are not what they expected. And so what they did there is called sampling bias, even though some of them might say, but I'm a user of this. I'm an actual user. So I'm someone who could, my opinion is valid, but you have sampling bias. And that means simply that the sample of people you chose is not representative of the whole population of actual users. So you're focusing on a subgroup, and usually the people working in your company, they tend to be for the type of product you're building, even though they're users. So think about Slack. Slack uses Slack internally. Still, the employees are Slack. They tend to be a bit more power users than people that are using Slack in other companies. So they're not necessarily representative of the whole population. So that would be one first mistake there, or pitfall that you could fall in. Another one, for example, is running experiments or trying to test things without counterfactuals or a control version. And this happens a lot, specifically in type of retail context, but also digital products type of context, because we have this time series component of things happening over time, and we want to change things. We want to change, for example, our conversion rate, or we want to change the number of active users and the growth of the product and so on. And so if you look at a timeline of what you're building, of your product, or of a specific metric, let's say active users, and at the particular date, you deploy a new feature, and then 5 months later, you compare your number of active daily users, and let's say it went up. And then some people might say, okay, this is great. We published this feature, and now the number of active users, it just grew a lot. And then the problem is you don't know if that was actually caused by the feature you have. It could simply be a seasonality factor. It could be something else that happened externally. And if you would have compared it to a control group, it might even have been the case that the people who used the feature versus how it was before, it could have grown anyways, but not as much as the control group. So your feature might have been worse than how you were before, and the growth of this metric is hiding that from you. So you have to be able to look at these and compare things to be able to see if there's some type of causality. Those are two first pitfalls. Another pitfall, and this is something we've talked about several times with US, is the fact of making decisions after looking at the data. And I think, and we have had conversations about this in marketing and so on. And some people might say, okay, how can you make a decision before you look at the data? I mean, I need the data to make the decision. And the way I'm going to explain this is, imagine we're launching maybe a new product, and we decide to create, as a product team, and with US, with our marketing team, we say, okay, let's create a landing page, and see how many potential users sign up for this particular new feature or new product, and use that as a way to determine if there is a market for that product. And so ideally, we would decide beforehand, based on maybe the revenue goals that we might need to keep this alive and everything, that we need at least 2,000 leads to confirm interest of this product, to give it a go. And so when the data comes in, if I made that decision beforehand, then the decision is black and white. I already know what to do. But the problem is, people tend to send out these experiments and then they try to make the decision afterwards. And the problem with this is that this is more about our biases and what we actually think in our heart, rather than the actual objective results. Because if I am somebody who was against the product or the feature from the very start, then we might get 1,000 leads, and I'll just say, no, that's not enough. We needed 5,000 maybe to get the product out, and we never came down to that beforehand. But I'm just trying to stop the product any way I can. And it also happens the other way around. If we get 1,000 different leads, then I might say, if I'm somebody who really am invested in that idea and I really wanted to come out, even though the numbers are not as good as expected, I might just be, but 1,000 is not so bad. It could have been worse. We should do this anyway. And so it's no longer a conversation, an objective conversation about the data and if we should do it or not. It becomes a conversation around opinions. It's, I think we should do it anyway, or I think we shouldn't do it. And everybody gets their own opinion in there. So that also makes it a bit troubling. So whenever a good idea that you might do is have a simple decision matrix. That's a tool that you can use where you can have a clear picture in advance for all of these different scenarios. So you can have your metric 1 and metric 2 and metric 3 and say, okay, if there's a success in metric 2, then what do we do? If there's no change in metric 2, then what we do? If metric 2 fails, then what do we do? And you could have rollback and rollout, or reevaluate, or not do anything, and all of these different things already defined beforehand. So those are a couple of examples there. I think I can come up with more examples, but I don't know, Wes, how are we in terms of time?
No, we're okay with time. It's interesting though. It's the way you explain things about declaring or taking decisions beforehand or after the fact that you have the data. It's funny how at first it's okay, I could maybe see how it could be both, but then once you explain it, it becomes patently obvious. I mean, to me, I think of a metaphor of American football where there's a lot of rules in that game, and a lot of people, even if you are not too familiar with the sport, there's end zones, right? Imagine, if you will, a version of the game where the coach says, okay, we're on one side of the field, we're just going to say this strategy, and we're going to see how far this strategy takes us downfield. And there's no end zone. We just see how far we go. And then you have some people that don't like the strategy or do like it that say, oh, look at, we didn't go that far, but what if it turns out that you only needed to go 100 yards or 100 meters and you went 130? Well, no one ever defined where the end zone was. So that person can say whatever they want. And same thing, vice versa. Someone can say, even if they only went 30 yards or 30 meters, can say, oh, look, this was a fantastic strategy, despite the fact that we know, I mean, the football would typically be 100 yards away. So, it's in the context of, say, sports where you need well-defined rules because it's extremely competitive. I mean, of course you have to know ahead of time. You have to know ahead of time. That's how the whole thing works. And so that's very insightful. I think that's it's quite interesting.
And specifically, I love that you bring sports into it, because sports is a great example of where this happens a lot. And not only making decisions before having the data, but also judging decisions based on the results. That's something you can't do. You should judge a decision based on the data or the information somebody had at the moment where they made the decision. And it happens a lot in sports. And I'm going to talk about soccer instead of
that's good. We'll balance things out. We got to keep things global. So I'm showing how American I am by thinking in terms of American football. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll talk about soccer instead. And it's so common that maybe you decided you're in the World Cup final, and then you have to make a decision. If you try to do some type of play, or you do something else, or you put one player in instead of another player, for example. And so if you let's say that you have the stats as a coach, and you know that this player works very well in this type of situations, and you put him into the field, and you have this other player who's known for scoring goals, but in that particular type of situation, he doesn't do as well. And so you put this other player in, and it fails, and you lose the World Cup. And then everybody just blowing up and saying, why did you put this player into the field? You should have chosen the other guy. The other guy is the one who scores, and so on. And that's a problem. They're judging the decision based on the result. When, if you look objectively on the data, using that player was the decision that made the most sense. And we shouldn't regret making that decision afterwards, even though we know that it was not the expected outcome.
Well, I got news for you that I don't think even if everyone in the world listens to our podcast today, I don't think that anyone's going to stop judging people after the fact. I mean, I can't imagine a stadium full of people saying, "Oh yeah, I get what your decision you made. Oh well, I went home." That'll never happen. But it's
the thing is, there's also an information imbalance. So as a fan, I usually don't have those stats in mind and so on. So I mean, it's part of the fun. It's part of the fun not knowing and then just getting mad at things. So yeah, we'll probably not change the world with this particular podcast, but just so we know that's exactly a bit how it is.